All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we're taking a deep dive into some seriously creepy, real-life horror stories. You know, the kind that make you check under the bed and maybe sleep with the lights on for a few nights.
We're talking about those unsettling encounters that stick with you, the ones that remind you that sometimes truth really is stranger than fiction.
Exactly, and our source material for this deep dive is the Vile Visions podcast, where people share their own personal experiences with the disturbing and unexplainable.
These aren't your typical ghost stories or urban legends, though.
Right, these are real people recounting events that actually happened to them, which makes it all the more, well, terrifying.
It's that it could happen to you factor that makes these stories so compelling and, let's be honest, a little bit unsettling.
All right, so let's jump right into our first story, the caller. Picture this. You're deep in a late-night caller duty session, all alone in the house when the phone rings.
Oh, that isolation already sets the scene perfectly.
You're completely engrossed, vulnerable, and then, bam, that unexpected interruption. He ignores it the first time, but the phone rings again.
And that's when that little seed of unease starts to sprout, right?
You bet. He answers the phone, and at first there's nothing but this eerie silence. Then he hears a sound, this guttural hissing, almost like a cat, but distorted and way too human.
It's like something out of a nightmare, that distortion of the familiar into something grotesque.
Exactly. He tries to say something, anything, to scare the caller off, but there's no response. Only this unsettling laughter in the background.
Oh man, that laughter would send chills down my spine.
And then, in a voice that just oozes creepiness, the caller says, "I'm just waiting for you to come upstairs."
Whoa. Okay, that's just straight up terrifying.
And that's when he realizes he's completely alone in the house.
Talk about a moment of pure terror.
He freaks out, runs out of the house, and goes straight to his friend's father, who thankfully calls the police. They search the entire house, top to bottom, but it's completely empty.
So mystery solved, case closed.
Not quite. The back door is unlocked, and it's wide open.
That's worse than finding the intruder, in a way.
That lingering uncertainty, wondering if the danger has truly passed or if it's still out there. Okay, so let's move on to our second story. This one is called The Family Secret. This one really hit home for me because it shows that sometimes the scariest things aren't strangers lurking in the shadows, but people we think we know, people we trust.
The people who are supposed to protect us, the ones we let our guard down around.
Exactly. So we have this seemingly sweet godmother, Sally, who runs a bunny farm. Sounds harmless enough, right?
Bunnies, yeah, can't get much more innocent than that.
But then there's her brother, Terry. He just has this unsettling vibe about him, you know?
Ah, yes, the quiet ones, always watching, observing.
Right. And then, out of the blue, he asks this seemingly innocent question about whether our storyteller's younger brother has a Facebook account.
A simple question, but something about it sets off alarm bells.
It feels off, but she brushes it off at first.
Until later, when she decides to check out Terry's Facebook profile, right?
You got it. And what she finds is, well, let's just say it's disturbing. His profile picture is this blank silhouette, and his friends list is full of teenage boys, some in, shall we say, compromising situations.
That's just creepy on so many levels.
She immediately tells her parents. They dig a little deeper. It turns out Terry has been accused of similar things in the past, but the charges were always dropped.
Talk about a chilling twist.
It makes you wonder how many other Terrys are out there, hiding in plain sight, taking advantage of trust and vulnerability. Okay, ready for story number 3. This one takes us to a remote cabin in the woods.
Oh, classic horror setting. I love it.
This story is called The Voice in the Dark. It's about a teenager left alone in his family's new cabin while his parents and little sister are away. To pass the time, he's playing The Legend of Zelda, completely absorbed in the game, when suddenly he hears a voice calling his name.
Isolation and darkness, a recipe for fear, for sure.
He assumes it's his parents, but when he goes to check, there's no one there. The voice calls his name again, louder this time, and now he's really creeped out.
I can feel the tension building.
He searches the entire cabin, but nothing.
Every creep of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside must have been sending his heart racing.
Absolutely. Then he looks outside, and standing under the streetlight, he sees a shadowy figure.
Oh man, that's the stuff of nightmares.
And here's the really creepy part. The figure doesn't have a shadow.
Okay, that's just next level unsettling.
As the streetlight flickers, the figure vanishes. He spends the rest of the night hiding in a closet, terrified out of his mind.
I don't blame him.
So there you have it, 3 pretty disturbing stories.
They really make you think twice about who or what might be lurking out there in the dark, don't they?
Exactly. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a little uneasy after those stories.
Yeah, definitely creepy, that's for sure.
It makes you wonder, though, are there any patterns or common themes that we can glean from these unsettling encounters?
Definitely. I mean, one thing that jumps out at me is that feeling of vulnerability. In each of these stories, the victim is in a situation where they're alone, isolated, or feel exposed.
You're right. The gamer at night, the teenager all by himself in that cabin, that sense of being alone. It definitely makes you more susceptible to fear and even manipulation.
It's like that primal instinct kicks in, the one that makes you feel like you're being watched when you're alone in the dark.
Exactly. And speaking of the dark, technology seems to play a pretty big role in some of these stories. Like in The Caller, the phone becomes this creepy tool for the stalker.
Right, technology is a double-edged sword. It can connect us, but it can also be used to exploit or harass.
And in The Family Secret, social media was almost like a hunting ground for that creepy uncle.
Which brings us to another important point, trust. These stories are stark reminders that even people we know and love can be dangerous.
It's a scary thought, but it's something we can't ignore.
Being aware, being cautious, but not letting that fear paralyze you.
It's about finding that balance, right?
Exactly. So what can we, as listeners, do to protect ourselves?
Besides maybe investing in a good security system, I'm all ears for some practical tips.
Well, being mindful of your online presence is a big one. Think carefully about the information you share, who you connect with. Especially for parents with young kids, have those conversations about online safety.
Because the internet can be a scary place for kids. They might not always recognize those red flags.
And another thing, trust your gut. If something feels off, if someone makes you uncomfortable, don't ignore that feeling.
You're right, better safe than sorry. These stories also made me think about the power of our own minds, how our imagination can sometimes fuel our fears.
Absolutely, our brains are wired to fill in the blanks when we're missing information, and that can lead to some pretty wild scenarios, especially when we're already feeling scared.
Like the teenager in that cabin, the darkness, the isolation, all of that amplified his fear.
It's like our senses become heightened when we're in those situations. Every little sound becomes a potential threat.
It makes me wonder how much of what we fear is real and how much is just our imagination running wild.
That's a tough question. What might terrify one person could have no effect on another.
It's like that saying, we're all haunted by different ghosts.
Exactly.
But regardless of whether it's real or imagined, the impact of fear is very real, right?
Absolutely. Fear triggers a physical response. It releases hormones, puts us in fight or flight mode.
So even though we know these stories are just stories, we still react to them on a physical level.
It's a testament to the power of storytelling.
And in this case, knowing that these events actually happen to real people makes them even more impactful.
It adds this whole other layer of, I don't know, weight and significance to the stories.
It turns them from mere entertainment into cautionary tales, reminding us that even the most mundane aspects of our lives can be disrupted by something unexpected, something terrifying.
And sometimes those terrifying things aren't monsters hiding under the bed, but the people who walk among us.
The ones we least expect. So as we delve deeper into these real-life horror stories, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think it's important to remember that while these stories are unsettling, we shouldn't let them paralyze us with fear.
Right, it's about finding that balance again, right?
Be aware, be vigilant, but don't let fear dictate your life.
Great advice. Now let's move on to the final part of our deep dive, where we'll take some listener questions and explore some additional resources for those of you who want to delve even further into the world of real-life horror and personal safety. So we've heard some pretty terrifying stories, real-life encounters that send chills down your spine. But it makes you wonder, what would you do if you found yourself face-to-face with something truly unsettling?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's easy to sit here and analyze these stories from a distance, but in the heat of the moment, who knows how any of us would react.
I know I'd like to think I'd be the hero, but realistically, I'd probably freeze up.
We all have different thresholds for fear, different coping mechanisms, but that's why I think it's so valuable to think about these situations in advance. Not to obsess over them, but just to have some mental preparedness.
Like a mental escape plan for scary situations.
Exactly. What do you do if you're home alone and get a creepy phone call? What's your plan if you see a suspicious figure outside your window? Having a plan, even just mentally rehearsing those scenarios, can help reduce panic and give you a sense of control if something does happen.
Okay, that makes sense. Knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely. And part of that knowledge is understanding the psychology of fear. Why are we so drawn to these horror stories in the first place? What is it about the dark and unsettling that captivates us?
Well, I think for a lot of people, it's the adrenaline rush. It's like a safe way to experience fear and excitement.
That controlled fear response. But I also think it taps into something deeper, something primal. Our fear of the unknown, our anxieties about death, the things that go bump in the night.
Like peering into the abyss, but from a safe distance.
Exactly. And by confronting those fears, even in a fictional setting, maybe it helps us process them, maybe even gain a sense of mastery over them.
So it's not just about being scared, it's about exploring those darker parts of ourselves.
And horror can also be a powerful tool for social commentary, for exploring themes of morality and justice.
It's fascinating how a simple, scary story can spark such deep conversations.
It can challenge our assumptions, make us question our beliefs, and ultimately it expands our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into real-life horror, I want to leave you with one final question to ponder. How has listening to these stories changed the way you perceive the world? Do you feel more vulnerable, more aware, or maybe even more connected to that shared human experience of fear?
It's a question worth reflecting on. And as you go about your day, remember to stay vigilant, stay curious, and never underestimate the power of a good, scary story.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to contemplate the shadows. Until next time, keep exploring the depths. And remember, the truth is often stranger and much more terrifying than fiction.